In today's video, we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. On the morning of February 11th, 1998, a sharp chill through the Tennessee woods persuaded James Lewis, Alan England, Daryl Moore, and Jerry Olson to prepare for their caving expedition. Olson had recently discovered a cave during a ridge-walking outing and invited his seasoned companions to join him in exploring it. Known locally as Weatherly Well, the cave entrance presented an immediate challenge, a narrow 9-inch wide slot that led 4 feet down, barely wide enough for one person to fit through at a time, before opening into a 7-foot drop into a larger passage, followed by a 10-foot drop. The group gathered at the entrance, inspecting the narrow slot. The opening, wet, claustrophobic, and congested, seemed to draw them into the Earth's icy maw. From the surface, they could see the initial drop, a steep descent into dark shadow. The passage beyond was supposed to twist like a corkscrew, creating an almost claustrophobic visual that suggested little room for error. Despite their collective experience, the cave's configuration demanded precise mapping of their approach. The group laid out their gear carefully, double-checking ropes and hand lines. It was clear the slot would only allow a single explorer to enter. Alan England, the oldest at 63 but still remarkably fit and the smallest of the group, volunteered to venture inside. With the rope secured above ground as a hand line, England prepared himself to descend into the narrow slot. The entrance, a mere 9 inches wide, was a daunting challenge even for someone of his slight build. It allowed one person at a time. Taking a deep breath, he began to contort his body, his ribs compressing as he maneuvered into the tight space. Every inch of his descent was a battle against the unyielding stone, his clothing catching on the damp, moist walls. By the time he slipped through the slot, his shirt and pants were soaked, his chest heaving from the effort. The descent that followed was less challenging, aided by gravity. The rope provided a steady guide as he lowered himself carefully into the chamber below. The 7-foot drop opened into a slightly larger passage, allowing him to stretch his cramped limbs for the first time. His headlamp then pointed towards the next section, which was just below him, another 10-foot drop, leading further into the cave's depths. England paused, letting the silence settle around him. The beam from his headlamp revealed more of the cave's layout, a network of twisting passages punctuated by sudden, sharp drops. As much as he wanted to explore further, England recognized the risks of venturing deeper alone. The 10-foot drop below required additional rope work, and without a partner to assist or secure him, the potential for disaster was too high. Reluctantly, he decided to turn back. His body was already damp and chilled from the moisture that clung to the cave walls, and he knew better than to push his luck. Ascending the 10-foot drop was straightforward. Years of caving experience guided his movements, his hands finding purchase on the rope, while his feet searched for solid footholds. Each pull brought him closer to the surface. He reached the base of the slot entrance with a sense of cautious relief. It was only then that England realized the full extent of the challenge ahead. What gravity had made simple during his descent was now about to be insurmountable. England gazed upward at the tight slot he had entered through. From below, the narrow gap seemed even more constricting. He positioned himself and began the climb, using the rope for leverage. But as he reached the slot, his progress halted. The narrow confines of the entrance pressed against his body, restricting his movement and leaving little room to maneuver. His muscles, already fatigued from the cold and exertion, struggled. Gravity, which had assisted his descent, now turned against him. He twisted and pulled, trying to force his body back through the narrow opening, but the situation was unforgiving. The slot was tighter than he remembered, and each attempt to push through only left him more fatigued. His clothing, soaked from the wet rock, clung to his skin, making each movement heavier and more laborious. From above, Lewis and Moore noticed England struggling. They tried pulling on the rope to assist him, but the tightness of the slot offered no room for leverage. Each tug seemed to wedge him further into the rock, pinning him in place. The expedition turned into an agonizing nightmare as England's strength began to wane. His hands trembled from cold and exhaustion, and the realization that he was trapped began to weigh heavily on him. The slot was merciless, its unyielding rock pressing against him like a vice. The temperatures inside the cave were already low, and since it was winter, the cold air from the entrance turned the already frigid conditions into a battle against hypothermia. England's soaked clothing clung to his body like ice, sapping his remaining warmth. He shivered uncontrollably, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The narrow confines of the slot restricted even his ability to expand his chest fully, leaving him with the sensation of being slowly suffocated by the cave itself. Lewis and Olsen scrambled to provide what aid they could. They lowered extra clothing and a thermos of warm drink to England, hoping to stave off the cold. England forced himself to drink, trying to fight from the freezing grip of the cave. But his situation remained dire. As time went by, he finally called out everyone, saying, "He can't do this anymore, and they need to get help as soon as they can." Lewis and Olsen wasted no time. Hiking back to Olsen's house, they called the East Tennessee Cave Rescue Team, relaying England's plight. Within 2 hours, the rescuers arrived at the scene, a team of highly skilled cavers equipped with specialized tools and techniques. By the time the team reached England, he had been trapped for nearly 5 hours. His skin was pale, his body trembling from the cold. The pain was unlike anything he had ever felt before. His mind was racing. He kept replaying the moment he slipped through the slot so easily, gravity aiding him without a second thought. But now, it was his enemy. The rescuers immediately assessed his condition, providing additional layers of clothing and encouraging him to eat and drink to combat hypothermia. The narrow slot posed a significant challenge to the rescuers. England's position, combined with the unforgiving geometry of the entrance, left little room for maneuvering. They rigged a complex system of pulleys and hauling devices, designed to carefully extract him without causing further injury. Each pull was painstakingly slow. England gritted his teeth against the pain as the cold rock pressed into his body, scraping against his chest and shoulders. The rescuers worked methodically, their every movement calculated to avoid worsening his predicament. Finally, after an hour of grueling effort, England emerged from the slot, battered but alive. The cold air outside was a relief compared to the suffocating chill of the cave. He was helped to his feet, his body shaking from exhaustion and cold, but his determination to walk back to the car unassisted spoke to his resilience. Reflecting on the experience, England admitted he had underestimated the difficulty of the exit. The cave's tight confines had hampered his ability to use his ascenders effectively, leaving him reliant on outside assistance. As always, viewer discretion is advised. On December 27, 2003, a group of 8 boys from the San Antonio Boys Village, along with 2 counselors, trekked toward Boy Scout Cave in Florida. Among them were Michael Sharrow, 15, and Javerick Henderson, 16, 2 adventurous teens eager to prove their mettle in the labyrinthine depths of the cave. Their counselors had decided to remain outside, citing their size as a limitation in navigating the tight passages. The cave was notorious for its narrow crawlways and sharp turns, but it was considered safe due to its stable structure and dry conditions. The group with just 9 flashlights began their descent shortly after noon. The temperature dropped to a constant 72 degrees Fahrenheit as they moved further from the entrance. Their counselor, who had stayed behind, had set up a small campfire near the entrance to keep warm. Unbeknownst to him, this decision would add a sinister twist to the unfolding nightmare. Michael and Henderson led the group. The air was still, almost suffocatingly silent, as the boys crawled and twisted through tight passages. Despite the cave's reputation for safety, its claustrophobic confines bred unease. The further they went, the more the oppressive darkness pressed against them. About an hour into their exploration, they reached a particularly challenging section of the cave, known as the hairpin curve. The group stopped to assess the passage. The counselor's absence was beginning to weigh on the boys, their guidance and physical strength sorely missed in such a precarious situation. Michael, determined to lead, pushed forward into the hairpin curve. The hairpin curve passage in Boy Scout Cave was a natural bottleneck, a narrow, horizontal slit in the rock with small twists, just wide enough for a single person to crawl through. The passage then curved sharply at an almost 180-degree angle, creating a blind corner that concealed what lay beyond. Rough, damp limestone walls closed in from all sides. The floor was uneven, littered with small rocks and debris, while the ceiling pressed low, forcing anyone attempting to pass to contort their body. The passage was tight, tighter than any they had encountered so far. Michael wriggled his way through, while Henderson followed closely behind. Henderson had to contort his body, twisting and turning to navigate the sharp bend. Suddenly he stopped, unable to move forward or backward. His breathing quickened as the realization dawned on him. He was stuck, completely twisted. Michael, just in front of him, noticed his struggle and moved to help. The rest of the group waited anxiously in the wider section of the passage, their nervous chatter echoing faintly in the narrow confines. Michael crawled back, wedging himself into the cramped space to assist Henderson. The sharp limestone walls pressed against them, scraping their skin as they struggled. The cave's silence was soon replaced by the sound of panic breathing and muffled shouts as Michael tried to free his friend. The effort was exhausting, the confined space sapping their energy and making every movement a battle. Henderson's body twisted unnaturally, wedged tightly in the unforgiving cave walls. Sharp edges dug into his ribs and hips, sending jolts of searing pain with every slight movement. His limbs' awkward bend sent relentless pressure on his entire body, making him feel as though the cave itself was crushing him alive. As the minutes turned into an hour, Michael began to feel the effects of the cold and exertion. Despite the cave's relatively mild temperature, the boys' bodies were losing heat rapidly due to their lack of movement and the constant contact with the cold limestone. And suddenly, the worst started happening. Michael's vision blurred, his muscles weakening as he continued to push and pull in an attempt to free Henderson. Without warning, Michael collapsed, his body slumping against the narrow walls. Panic surged through Henderson as he realized his friend was unconscious. Trapped and unable to move, he could only shout for help, his voice echoing through the passage. The boys waiting in the wider section of the cave were thrown into chaos. They scrambled to assess the situation, their flashlights flickering as batteries began to wear thin. The group realized they were in over their heads, with Michael unconscious and Henderson stuck. Their initial bravado turned to fear. The air felt heavy, amplifying their dread. Some of the boys began to panic, convinced the fire outside was consuming the oxygen. They decided they needed to get out at any time. The lack of oxygen will further make the situation for everyone. Every single one of them was now on borrowed time. No one wanted to leave Michael and Henderson behind, but they had no choice. Realizing they couldn't free their friends on their own, they made the difficult decision to leave Michael and Henderson behind and crawl back to the entrance to call for help. Outside, the counselors were oblivious to the unfolding disaster. When the boys reached them, out of breath and wild-eyed, he could barely explain what had happened. The counselors extinguished the fire immediately, their faces pale with realization. One of them immediately called 911, while the other decided to go back and comfort the boys, their attempts overshadowed by the gravity of the situation. Within an hour, rescue teams arrived at the scene. The first responders were experienced cavers, but even they understood the challenges ahead. Boy Scout caves' tight passages were infamous, and navigating them while carrying equipment added another layer of difficulty. Reports of potential oxygen depletion added a sense of urgency. Inside the cave, the rescuers found the group huddled together, their faces pale and streaked with tears. The air was thick with fear and the imagined threat of suffocation. The rescuers reassured the boys while assessing the situation. Subsequent expert assessments revealed that oxygen levels in the cave were not compromised. It appeared that the initial panic had triggered a worst-case scenario mindset, leading the boys to mistakenly assume the cave's air was toxic. In reality, the air was safe, and the perceived threat had been largely psychological. Everyone was relieved to find that out. However, Michael and Henderson were still in danger. The rescue operation began swiftly. Teams entered the cave armed with specialized tools, including harnesses and chisels, to free the trapped boys. They followed the route outlined by the remaining group, their progress slow but steady. The narrow passages made carrying large amounts of gear impossible, forcing them to rely on minimal tools and their own strength. When the rescuers reached the hairpin curve, the sight was grim. Henderson was still conscious but visibly shaking, his skin pale and clammy. Michael lay slumped ahead him, unresponsive. The rescuers knew time was running out. Hypothermia was setting in. Despite the cave's 72-degree temperature, prolonged exposure to the rock and the lack of insulation had sapped their body heat. Henderson's speech was slurred, his movements sluggish, while Michael's shallow breathing signaled a critical state. The rescuers worked methodically, first assessing the situation before attempting to free Henderson. They used chisels to widen the narrow passage, each strike of the tool echoing ominously through the cave. The tight space made maneuvering difficult, forcing the rescuers to contort their bodies in ways that mirrored the boys' earlier struggles. It took over an hour to free Henderson. As he was pulled from the hairpin curve, he let out a sob of relief, though his body remained stiff and trembling. The rescuers quickly wrapped him in a thermal blanket and began the arduous task of moving him through the narrow passages toward the surface. With Henderson safe, attention turned to Michael. His condition was critical, his unconscious state a stark reminder of the dire situation. The rescuers worked with renewed urgency, chiseling away at the rock to create enough space to extract him. Every second felt like an eternity as they fought against the unyielding limestone. After nearly 2 hours, they finally freed Michael. His body was cold to the touch, his pulse weak but present. The rescuers carefully secured him in a harness and began the slow process of carrying him to the surface. The narrow passages made every step a challenge, the rescuers' bodies aching as they navigated the labyrinth. When they finally emerged from the cave, the scene was one of relief and urgency. Emergency medical teams were waiting, their equipment ready to combat the effects of hypothermia. Michael and Henderson were rushed to the hospital, where they received immediate treatment. Both boys were alive, but severely hypothermic. For Michael, it took an entire day for him to regain consciousness. In the end, the counselor's decision to stay outside the cave, though made with good intentions, had left the boys without critical guidance. The lack of proper equipment and preparation had turned a simple exploration into a life-threatening situation.